You have disobeyed a direct order, soldier. What do you have to say for yourself?
You are senior here. Look at your uniform.
The barracks were silent, the tension hanging thick in the air. Sara stood still, her hands clenched at her sides, every fiber of her being fighting the instinct to react. She had been humiliated enough, but this was different. General Raz was a man whose opinion carried weight, and right now, he was looking at her as if she were a failure. The general's gaze was icy, piercing through her worn uniform. The patch on her sleeve, once a proud symbol of rank and service, seemed out of place. It had seen better days, much like Sara herself. Yet there she stood, trying to hold her ground in front of a room full of soldiers. Without a word, the general circled around her, his eyes fixed on the patch. There was no hiding from him. The entire room had fallen silent, watching with bated breath. His voice finally broke the stillness, harsh and unforgiving. This is how you show up after years of service? Do you understand what your uniform says about you? His words cut deeper than any of the previous reprimands. Sara's face remained stoic. She couldn't afford to show weakness, not here, not now. She had earned her place, even if her uniform no longer looked the part. "Sir," she began, keeping her voice steady despite the nerves twisting inside her. "I had my reasons." The general's sharp eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, a silence stretched between them. The room was thick with tension, but Sara stood firm, unwilling to be broken. "You are senior here," the general repeated, his tone cold. "Look at your uniform." He gestured once more to the patch, and the room seemed to hold its collective breath. It wasn't just the worn fabric, it was the history, the stories, the sacrifices it represented. Yet to the others, it was simply a ragged symbol of neglect, one that didn't belong in a place of honor. But Sara wasn't ready to explain herself just yet. She had earned the right to stand here, and she would prove it. As the silence stretched, Sara's mind drifted back to the moment when she had first put on that uniform. It wasn't the torn, faded one she wore now, but the one she had received on the day she joined. It had been a symbol of pride, an emblem of her dedication. Back then, it fit perfectly, the patch on her shoulder a sign of the future she hoped to build. But life had other plans. Sara wasn't like the other soldiers, born into wealth or privilege. She had come from a modest background, working her way up through the ranks, earning every promotion, every stitch of the uniform she wore. Her journey had never been easy. Yet, it was in those hard, grueling moments that Sara found her true strength. She learned to adapt, to push through when others would have given up. The patch on her sleeve, though worn now, was not just a piece of cloth. It was a testament to every battle she had fought, both on and off the field. The long nights, the harsh training, the injuries that had never fully healed, all of it had led her to this moment. Yet, it seemed that the very symbol of her sacrifice had now become a target of ridicule. Her fingers grazed the edges of the patch, a soft sigh escaping her lips as memories flooded back. She remembered the long days spent on missions, the quiet camaraderie with her fellow soldiers, and the promises she had made to herself. She had always believed that her strength lay not in appearances, but in the effort and resilience she showed every day. But now, standing before the general, the very uniform she had fought so hard to maintain had become a symbol of everything wrong with her. The old fabric, the fraying edges, the faded patch, all of it painted her as weak in the eyes of those who didn't understand. It wasn't about the uniform. It was about everything that had led her to wear it. But Sara wasn't going to explain that. She had always let her actions speak louder than her words. And today, her actions would have to speak for her once again. The general's words still hung in the air, each one landing like a blow. Sara stood there, rigid, her back straight, but her heart was heavy. Every soldier in the room was watching her now, their eyes on the patch, the symbol that once represented her pride. She could feel the sting of their gazes, the judgment, the whispers that had already begun to spread. It was as if the room had shrunk, the walls closing in around her. Every movement of the general, every flicker of his expression, felt magnified. Is this how you represent us? The general continued, his voice cutting through the silence. Is this the example you set for the others? He gestured again to her uniform, his gaze lingering on the patch that had seen too many battles and too many years. Sara swallowed hard, her throat dry. She wanted to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she stood there, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. The humiliation she felt now was something she had never experienced before. It wasn't just the judgment of the general. It was the weight of the entire room, the expectations, the pressure to be perfect in the eyes of those who had never seen the struggle behind her uniform. The soldiers, her comrades, whispered amongst themselves. She could hear snippets of their conversation, the doubt creeping into their voices. She's too old for this. Can't even take care of her uniform. How did she even get this far? Sara's heart tightened. She knew what they were thinking. She had heard the same words behind her back before, but today they were louder. Today, they weren't just whispers. They were the harsh truth staring her in the face. But even as the embarrassment threatened to consume her, something inside Sara refused to break. This wasn't the first time she had been underestimated. It wasn't the first time her uniform had been used against her. And it wouldn't be the last. Her grip on the edges of her sleeves tightened. She wouldn't let them see her falter. Sara knew that in order to rise from this, she had to show them who she really was, beyond the patch, beyond the uniform. She had to prove that her worth wasn't measured by the fabric she wore, but by the strength she carried within her. As the whispers in the room grew louder, Sara could feel the heat of the general's glare burning into her. The room seemed to grow colder, despite the tension. The shame weighed heavily on her shoulders. But amidst the humiliation, something unexpected began to stir within her. A flicker of defiance, buried deep beneath years of discipline and respect for her uniform, began to rise. She hadn't anticipated this moment, but in the face of judgment, Sara felt a surge of pride. The general had focused so much on the frayed edges and the faded patch that he had missed something vital. He didn't know the story behind the patch. He didn't know the sacrifices, the victories, and the long nights that had been stitched into that very piece of cloth. For years, the patch on her sleeve had been a silent witness to her struggle. It wasn't just an insignia of rank. It was a mark of her legacy. The patch had been awarded to her during a mission that had nearly cost her everything. She remembered the fierce battle, the soldiers she had led, the comrades she had lost, the unspoken promises made in the heat of conflict. The patch wasn't just worn with pride. It was earned through blood and sweat. But no one knew that. No one saw the invisible scars that came with wearing it. Sara's fingers brushed the patch again, the edges soft and worn from years of wear. She could almost feel the weight of the memories attached to it, the faces of those who had fought alongside her, the cheers of victory, the long hours spent away from family, and the endless training sessions that had pushed her beyond what she thought possible. This patch was her history, but the general and the others in the room saw only what was on the surface, a worn-out symbol, a mark of neglect. They didn't see the woman behind it. They didn't see the soldier who had earned every inch of her uniform, no matter how frayed it had become. For a moment, Sara closed her eyes. She felt the energy of those memories surge within her, pushing away the shame that threatened to overtake her. The patch was more than just fabric. It was her story. When she opened her eyes again, the general's gaze was still fixed on her. But this time, Sara stood taller. The weight of the room was still there, but now it felt different. She wasn't the broken soldier they thought her to be. The general's intense stare remained locked on Sara as he circled around her, his eyes piercing into every inch of her. But then something shifted. His expression softened, just for a split second, and Sara noticed it. The cold authority that had filled his face when he scolded her now seemed to waver as he paused in front of her. His gaze fell to the patch on her sleeve once more. Sara held her breath. This was the moment. She could feel the weight of every soldier's eyes in the room, but for once, they didn't feel like a threat. This was the moment where everything would change, where the truth would finally come to light. The room had been tense, quiet, waiting for the general's judgment. But as his eyes lingered on the patch, Whispers began to spread through the ranks. It wasn't loud at first, just a murmur that rippled through the soldiers. Is that the same patch? One soldier whispered, his voice barely audible. Another soldier, leaning forward, glanced at the patch with a mixture of curiosity and recognition. I think it is. I heard that was awarded to only the most distinguished soldiers. But her uniform, he trailed off, his words hanging in the air. The whispers grew louder as soldiers exchanged glances, trying to understand. The patch wasn't just a piece of cloth anymore. It was a symbol of something much deeper, something none of them had noticed until now. Sarah's heart raced. The soldiers around her were beginning to see it. They were beginning to understand. This was no ordinary patch. The general, still studying the patch, took a step back. His expression was unreadable now, but Sara could see a flicker of something. Respect, perhaps? Recognition? He wasn't just seeing the patch as a worn-out relic anymore. He was seeing the story behind it. One soldier, an older man who had served under the general for years, stepped forward. "Sir," he said, his voice careful but respectful, "that patch, it was given for exceptional valor during the battle at Razor Ridge. Only a handful of soldiers earned it." He looked at Sara with newfound respect. "But I didn't know she earned that." The general's eyes flicked between the patch and Sara. For the first time, the tension seemed to break, and something else filled the room, a sense of understanding. The general, who had been ready to publicly humiliate her, now found himself standing face to face with the truth. Sara wasn't just the soldier who had neglected her uniform. She was the soldier who had earned every ounce of respect in that room, even if no one had realized it. The whispers began to quiet as the soldiers processed the new information. Sara, still standing tall, felt the weight of their judgment shift. It wasn't the patch they needed to see. It was her story. The room had fallen into a hushed silence, the weight of realization settling on everyone present. The murmurs had quieted, but the tension was still palpable. The general, standing just a few paces away from Sara, took one last long look at the patch. His sharp eyes scanned it once more, as though searching for something that had eluded him before. Then he spoke. "That patch," the general began, his voice steady but with an underlying respect, "was not just given for time served or for good conduct. It wasn't about wearing a uniform well or showing up on time." He paused, his gaze never leaving the patch on Sara's arm. "That patch was awarded for exceptional bravery, for sacrifice, for leading your men through hell and back." A collective breath was taken by the soldiers. The meaning of the patch had just been laid bare, and the realization was staggering. Sara wasn't just another soldier. She had earned that patch through unimaginable challenges, ones that most of them could only hear about in stories. Sara stood still, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected the general to acknowledge it publicly. But there it was, her journey, her sacrifice, finally being recognized in front of everyone. It was no longer about the worn fabric, the frayed edges. The patch was a symbol of everything she had overcome, and now everyone knew it. The general continued, his voice unwavering. "Only those who prove themselves on the battlefield earn this honor. It was awarded to soldiers who defied the odds, faced death head-on, and emerged victorious. If you wear this patch, you carry a legacy." His eyes locked with Sara's, his tone softening. "You carry a legacy of courage." The room was still, the weight of his words sinking in. The soldiers, who had once whispered in judgment, now stood in awe. The shift was palpable. The patch, which had once seemed like a symbol of failure, was now revered for what it truly represented. The general took a step forward, his voice now softer but filled with respect. "Sara," he said, his words carrying a depth that made every soldier in the room listen closely, "you may not wear the uniform you once did, but your strength, your honor, is what truly defines you. And that," he said, pointing to the patch, "will never fade." For the first time since the confrontation began, Sara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The humiliation that had threatened to swallow her was now replaced with something else, recognition. The general had seen her, truly seen her, and in doing so, had given her back something she had almost lost, her dignity. The room, once filled with whispers and judgment, now hummed with a different energy. Sara could feel it, the shift, the respect she had once longed for, the recognition she had earned through years of struggle, was finally beginning to settle in the eyes of the soldiers around her. The general's words still echoed in her mind, but now they carried a weight she hadn't fully appreciated before. Legacy, courage, those were the words that defined her, not the faded uniform she wore or the patch that had been ignored for so long. The general had called her out, but not to humiliate her. He had done it to unveil a truth that no one, including herself, had fully seen. One by one, the soldiers looked at her differently. The man who had whispered about her worn-out uniform earlier now stood with his back straight, his gaze respectful. He was the first to speak, breaking the silence that had hung over them like a cloud. "I didn't know," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of realization. "I didn't know what that patch meant." "I'm sorry," Sara nodded, not saying anything, but the nod itself spoke volumes. She didn't need to explain. The past few minutes had done all the talking for her. Another soldier, a younger woman who had once looked at Sara with doubt in her eyes, now approached her cautiously. "I've heard stories about Razor Ridge," she said softly, almost as if testing the waters. "I didn't realize you were the one who led the charge." Sara didn't flinch. She was no longer the woman who had been judged for her appearance. The respect, once absent, was now flowing in from all sides. She didn't need to prove herself anymore. Her story had been told, through the words of the general and the understanding that had started to settle in her comrades' hearts. The general, who had been silent for a moment, stepped forward and looked at Sara with an intensity that spoke volumes. "Today, I didn't just learn about your strength. I learned that you're a leader, not just because of what you've done in battle, but because of what you've had to endure. And that's something worth admiring." The soldiers were now silent, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was one filled with respect, understanding, and perhaps a little awe. Sara stood in the center of the room, no longer the subject of ridicule, but the embodiment of the very thing they had all come to the military to achieve: honor. The tension in the room slowly faded, replaced by a quiet reverence. The soldiers, who had once looked at Sara with doubt and judgment, now regarded her with newfound respect. The whispers had stopped, replaced by a shared understanding of what she had truly endured, not just on the battlefield, but in the quiet moments when no one was watching. Sara stood tall, her posture no longer stiff with the weight of humiliation, but with the quiet pride of someone who had finally been seen for who she was. The uniform, once a symbol of her supposed failure, now felt lighter on her shoulders. It wasn't perfect, but neither was she. The general had seen past the surface and recognized her true worth. As the soldiers began to disperse, Sara remained in the center of the room, still absorbing the shift in the atmosphere. She had always known that her journey wasn't about accolades or recognition. But today, in front of everyone, she had received something far more valuable than praise. She had been understood. The general, standing at the back of the room, caught her eye. For a moment, their gazes met, and in his eyes, Sara saw something unexpected. Respect, yes, but also something else. Something unspoken. He walked toward her, his footsteps steady, and when he stopped in front of her, he gave a small nod. "Sara," he said, his voice softer than before, "you've earned more than that patch. You've earned the right to lead, not just in battle, but in spirit. You're a testament to the strength we all should strive for." Sara nodded in return, her chest swelling with pride. The words meant more than any medal or decoration ever could. As the general turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sara standing there with the soldiers who had once doubted her, Sara finally allowed herself a small smile. She wasn't just the soldier who wore a frayed uniform anymore. She was the soldier who had earned her place through perseverance, sacrifice, and unwavering resolve. The room emptied, but Sara stayed behind, her mind already turning to the future. She knew her journey was far from over, but now she wasn't alone. The respect she had fought for, the dignity she had struggled to reclaim, was now hers, and with it came the understanding that she could keep going no matter the odds. The barracks were quiet now, the final footsteps of the soldiers fading into the distance. Sara stood alone in the room, but she didn't feel alone. For the first time in years, she felt truly seen, not just by the general, but by her comrades, by the people who had once doubted her. The patch on her uniform was still there, faded and worn, but it no longer held the same weight it once did. It wasn't a symbol of neglect or weakness. It was a mark of survival, of resilience. It was a reminder of everything Sara had overcome, of the woman she had become. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, the battles, the sacrifices, the long nights spent wondering if she was truly good enough. She had spent so much of her time questioning her worth, trying to fit into a mold that others had created for her. But today, in front of her fellow soldiers, she had broken free of that mold. She had found her strength, not in the uniform she wore, but in the story behind it. As Sara turned to leave the room, her thoughts drifted to the future. There was still so much ahead of her. The road would be difficult, the challenges unrelenting, but she was ready. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into the room earlier. She was stronger, more resilient, and more determined than ever before. The general had seen her for who she truly was, and now, so had the others. The respect she had earned today would carry her forward, not just in the military, but in every aspect of her life. She would never again question her place, her worth. She had proven, not to anyone else, but to herself, that she had the strength to stand tall, no matter the circumstances. As she walked out of the barracks, the sun was beginning to set, casting a golden light across the field. Sara stood for a moment, taking in the sight. It felt like the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a future filled with hope, strength, and purpose. She had earned it. And that's the story of Sara's journey from humiliation to honor. A reminder that no matter how tough the battle, our true strength lies within us. If you've been inspired by Sara's story, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with others who need to hear this, and subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Keep believing in yourself, because the greatest victories are often the ones we win in our hearts.